Gladwin D'Souza, who's the co-chair of our conservation committee, along with Katja Irwin. We're glad for her to be here today. Gladwin had to leave for another meeting, but the co-chair of our sustainable land use committee, Gita Dev, is here to speak with you today. Sustainable land use committee. Gita is an architect who practiced in San Francisco doing civic, housing, and educational projects for cities around the Bay, with an emphasis on community participation in the design of projects. She has served at local, state, and national levels of the American Institute of Architects and was chair of their National Housing Committee for several years. She has since joined Sierra Club's Sustainable Land Use Committee and has actively worked with many cities in the Bay Area to support successful infill development along transit corridors to reduce sprawl and save open space while accommodating necessary growth. Please welcome Gita.
The good news is there is light at the end of the tunnel. The bad news is it's a freight train. In fact, climate change is like a freight train bearing down on us. And if we don't get out of the way, we're going to get hurt. At the same time, the Bay Area is growing. And with that growth and with climate change, we have a problem as to where to grow. And that's why I'm here today to talk to you about sustainable land use issues, because a lot of what city councils do involves land use, and a lot of the solutions, a lot of the risks involved with climate change involve land use. To the east, at the bay, the water is rising. We're having flooding. And in 2000, we said the waters would rise at least 3 feet this century, maybe more, maybe 15 feet. Well, we're 20% through this century already, so we're confronting this very real danger. On the west side, with climate change, we have increasing risk of fire. Therefore, growth into the hills is really not a good idea for our cities. Does this advance? A little bit of history is called for right here. In 2006, California recognized climate change as a major problem and required all our cities to consider to get all their carbon emissions back down to 1990 levels. That was in 2006, by the year 2030. That seemed almost unthinkable at the time. Now, 12 years later, we are much more prepared to consider this a real threat. Now, cities really struggled with that. In fact, I think most cities just ignored it. So 2 years later, the state passed another law, SB 375, which said, all right, if you're not going to listen, here's what we're going to do. We're going to tie all your transportation funding to your cities, to your plan for reducing your greenhouse gases. And let's see if you get serious about it now. So this was part of the requirement that the metropolitan area band together and come up with an integrated transportation and land use strategy for reducing the greenhouse gases. So ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments, banded together and came up with Plan Bay Area, which established, as you can see, those little pink dots are the priority development areas on the transportation linkages. So why transportation? Well, as we've been hearing, transportation is the elephant in the room. It contributes more than 40% of our greenhouse gas in the Bay Area. This is not true in other areas, but our Bay Area, transportation is the big culprit. So the plan was to focus all our growth now along the transit corridors with the idea that we need to reduce our dependence on cars. certainly not increase the number of cars, because we are already in trouble. To make transportation options available, to grow our options of getting around without a car, and really to make biking and walking something that we would really want to do. It's really not safe now. I remember in Houston walking, I had to walk on the street. There aren't any sidewalks in Houston. So here we don't have sidewalks that are safe. So this is an important issue for us. So the Sustainable Land Use Committee, which came into being partly because we saw how cities were struggling with this, we started working with cities up and down the transportation corridor in San Mateo and actually in Santa Clara as well, to look into what they were doing about planning to reduce their carbon emissions around transportation and infill growth on land use issues. And in looking at it, we realized very quickly that everyone was at a different stage and we need to develop some guidelines for ourselves to evaluate what they were doing and how they were doing it, whether these plans were going to work. So we came up with these guidelines, generally focused on a station area with a radius about, quarter mile or half a mile. A quarter mile is a 5-minute walk. A half mile is a 10 or a 15-minute walk. So this is station area plans that every city was required to undertake to show how you were going to try to do infill growth along transit to solve your carbon problem. So we felt there were 3 basic areas that each city needed to address. The first one is obviously compact growth, which is bringing density around the transit stations, or along the transit corridors, but with a lot of amenities so that this community can actually walk to all its tasks, so that you don't have density near transit, which we call transit adjacent development, but rather transit-oriented development, communities where there are amenities that you can actually use, and when you need to get somewhere, you can use transit. We thought the other thing was the transportation itself, to make the walking the easiest way to get around, the pleasantest way to get around, and also to see whether the plans showed creative ways to create more options to get around if you needed to, not walk or bike. Whether these were shuttles or both ways to get people out of their cars by discouraging car use as well as then giving them other realistic options. Whether it was car share. Since then, Uber and Lyft have become very big too, but they're creating transportation problems. And then the buildings themselves, greening the buildings. So I thought that the easiest way might be to discuss it by looking at a couple of our cities and what they have done. Is this working all right? Yeah, thank you. So Redwood City is a good example because they were one of the early adopters. They started their specific plan very soon after these legislative things came into play. And then they got a delay because they were sued by, doesn't matter. But by 2010, they had a plan in place. Now, they are a little different than other cities, which is the reason I bring it up. They actually, when they did their visioning, they had a very clear idea of what they decided they wanted to do. They used to be a pretty vibrant little town because they were the seat of county government. So in 1950s, there were stores, you could go shopping downtown. But with the emergence of the regional shopping centers, that all went by the wayside, and they earned the nickname of Deadwood City, which they did not like. So their idea was, how can we make our town a place where we can go and do things, rather than go to San Francisco if you want to have a night out. With that in mind, they put on the front cover of their specific plan this image, so that they always kept it in mind. They wanted pedestrian-friendly streets, which are beautiful, with trees, fewer cars, and they recognized when they discussed this, that you don't get that kind of vibrant town without a certain amount of density. They thought of Paris and said, well, the entire Paris is 6 stories, the center of Paris, and you have lovely street life. So they recognized that and they accepted that. So to their credit, they have executed that. In their specific plan, it sort of rises like a cone from 4 stories at the edges, 6 stories to even 8 stories. So they have put in place a lot of housing that is high-rise, and they've also got offices that are also high-rise, and there's several taller than this, to the great dismay of some of the residents of Redwood City, because they're not all very nice. But what they did do successfully was Redwood City is rich with amenities. Now this is crucial when you're trying to create a community, that they have all the things that you need. They have schools all around them. They have playgrounds. They've got two big grocery stores, Safeway and Whole Foods. They have all the shopping center services. They also decided that they wanted to be an entertainment hub. And so they moved the movie theaters in here. They have a community Broadway plays. They have clubs. They have music. And then they decided earlier, we need a living room for our city. Maybe, just maybe, if we build it, they'll come. And they did. But I have to tell you, the best money that Redwood City spends is that tiny little budget in Parks and Rec. That is the best investment that they have. As far as transportation, they have a pedestrian-friendly environment. There are streets that are purely pedestrian. They are working on their mobility. They do show you where you can park. You know, they have electronic signboards that say 221 spaces here, but then 400 spaces in the other place. On the other hand, I want to talk to you about an example that happened to be in Santa Clara, this development called City Place. And so I just want to point out that Redwood City had a vision of where they wanted to go, but they executed it using those principles. In City Place, some of those principles have not come into play. What you're seeing there is Santa Clara's vision of an entertainment center. They were very jealous of the fact that Santana Row is so successful, but it's on the border and it really belongs to San Jose. Every revenue dollar goes to San Jose. So there's no there in Santa Clara. They said, we want to hear it here. And so they found a developer who could execute it. They're very good developers. The Levi Station, the stadium, which you see at the bottom of the slide, is at the very northern end of the city. And here you see it. And they had a big golf course, which was very underutilized. They decided, this is how we will get the center, and it was also a revenue enhancement, to be very honest. They had a big hole in their budget, a deficit, and they needed to find a way to fill it. So this was to be a revenue generating process, not only by leasing the land out, but by having the entertainment hub to get sales tax and the hotel and everything that went with it. The white dots that you see in the corner is an industrial area, which they are zoning for housing. The reason is, okay, so here we are. So mixed use, compact mixed use is key. Well, City Place cannot have mixed use because housing is not allowed on a dump. The golf course is the old dump, which almost all golf courses are. So there's no housing. So you have the entertainment hub in the middle, and as you can see, all around it is traditional office park with a lot of parking and a lot of multi-story garages. This is not what we call compact mixed use. So there will be housing, but it'll be in that corner. And to their credit, they're doing high density. It's 100 dwelling units an acre. So there'll be 45 acres of 4,500 units. However, with 5.5 million square feet of office, you will generate 20 to 30,000 workers every day. That's a small town. And you have 4,000, 5,000 units of housing. That's not a jobs housing balance. This is the other part of resilience that we need to, as a peninsula, confront. We have a jobs housing imbalance. We need to put in place policies that balance the office construction with the housing development. I will say Mountain View is, I think, the only city that has taken a step in that direction in the Weissman district. They have what they call a jobs housing balance requirement, that they will not approve an office project until housing catches up. So I urge all city council members and planning departments to think about this. We need to work on this, whether it's at the ABAG level, as an area we need to work on this problem. So that's an issue of resilience that we need. The reason that it's really good to have a good plan for growth is that when we talk about sprawling into the hills, or we talk about spreading into the bay, we can all say, no, that we do have places to grow on our urban footprint. We don't need to fill in the bay, and we don't need to tear all the, go into the forest. So just to continue City Place, as you can see where it's located, north of 101, just along 237, it's one of the most congested freeways at all times, maybe not all times, but definitely in commute hours. The only way to get to the site is by light rail, which is notoriously slow. It's not a very good transportation option. It's also, by the way, on the Amtrak line. So yes, commuters from Sacramento can come, or East Bay can come, but if you live in Santa Clara, it's very hard to get there for the entertainment or for work. So that, the transportation is a problem, the housing is a problem. And when we came to it very late, we were asked to look at this after the EIR, the environmental report, was already done. The development agreement was being finalized. When Sierra Club and other environmental groups were asked to please, could you come look at this? They had a lot of open space. They had 240 acres, but now they were proposing to have all office parks and no open space. So we really talked to them about having such a huge population, 30,000 workers, 10,000 residents, and absolutely no place to go other than into your workspace. So we actually drew that up and went around and talked to everyone. Hey, how about, here's your opportunity to do a beautiful Santa Clara public park along the river. Wouldn't that be wonderful? You could put all kinds of amenities in there. Why don't you give 93 acres of your 240 to be a public park? It would be wonderful. And they all looked at us cross-eyed and like, you know what? The train is at the station. But we persisted. We talked to everyone, the developers, the council members, the staff. We talked dollars and cents to the staff. We told them that you're wasting this money, you're throwing it away on parking lots. You could be doing it instead into a park, instead of parking lots. Well, we were persuasive. They said, all right, you can have 45 acres and $5 million. Do a park. That's the parcel bigger than you. And he said, it's not on the road. But we said, fine. We're still fighting to get them a river park, a river walk, which would be wonderful, right? So, what I want to point out is that those policies are real. When it's not enough to just come up with an idea, you have to take all those other items into consideration. How are you going to get there? Where is the people going to live? Is the jobs housing balance going to work? Is there open space for people to recreate? And so these are all issues of resilience, because when you have projects that come along that are right on the bay, like Facebook, the only good thing about Facebook is its rooftop terrace. Seriously? I mean, the traffic problems it's created, there's no way to get to it. Maybe it'll be the way to get Dumbarton Rail there, but that's 100 years, 5 years from now. But you can see it's out in the bay. It's also bird-friendly design, because they did take that into account, which was really good of them. But resilience as a policy is something that we all need to take into account. We need land use policies for this century, not last century. This century. Last century, we were filling in the bay. We wanted to fill in the whole bay. We wanted it to just be a river, not a bay. But in the 1950s, they stopped that. Now we're in the next century. We can't go back to filling in the bay. We need all these spaces to grow the bay as the bay rises, to provide wetlands and uplands, to protect us. The last thing I want to talk to you about is, okay, we've talked about infill growth along the transit corridor, but what about the rest of our community? So we want to talk about this framework for looking at the resilience in the rest of our community. So this was one thing that we're thinking about now when we're sharing it with you for the first time, really. So we started out looking at where are all the parks, and we took San Mateo. We just happened to take San Mateo. In fact, the young member who put this together is here. Anna, you can hold up your hand. She lives in San Mateo, and she identified all the parks. And then we looked at the walk sheds around each park. That's a half-mile radius around each park. That means that you can walk to your neighborhood park. And that showed us where there weren't enough parks, and where, in fact, cities should look at locating new parks. That's where you should locate the new parks. So this way, you will have everyone able to walk to their local park. That's a healthier lifestyle than getting in your car to go, if this becomes a neighborhood, really. We then added on top of that the bike network, the master plan, the bike master plan, to see if it connected all the parks. This way you would be able to bike between parks or walk to your park. And then if you add to that, that you plant trees, I don't know if you can see it, but each of those has tree cover all along each of those streets. These are the streets where you want to plant your trees so that you have shaded bike paths, shaded walking paths, so it's pleasant to walk around. And that immediately brings up green infrastructure. I don't know, how many cities already are doing green infrastructure? Right, well, California state law is requiring every city to look at their green infrastructure, and by that they mean stormwater. They are concerned that the stormwater which goes into storm drains is going straight out into our creeks and polluting our bay. So that's it. They've had it with that. Every city is going to now have to do green stormwater infrastructure, put the stormwater into bioswales so it's filtered before it goes down into your storm drain, or hopefully it goes down into the groundwater and recharges the groundwater. So what you see here are is a bioswale alongside. Now, if you've planted trees along these streets, these are the streets where you want to put the bioswales first, because this is where the water is, and then you can plant planting along it too. Now, the added benefit of this, and the reason that we are the Sierra Club, was we were really looking for a way to get the bees and the butterflies from the bays to the hill, from the bay to the hills. And that's how we came up with this idea. And I think it's a damn good idea, if you'll pardon the French. So, is there a dividend when we think of our policies as being sort of resilient? So you get a park network, you get shade trees, calming the traffic, very important. If you're going to put pedestrians and bicycles on any street, slow down the traffic. We're getting a rising incidence of traffic accidents, and we need to slow the traffic by all the usual means, narrow the lanes, put bulb outs, all the usual lanes, reduce the number of lanes. These need to be your pedestrian and bicycle arterials, if you would. This is how you get around. This is how you start prioritizing alternative ways of getting around than jumping in your car. This needs to be the pleasanter way to get around. So you prioritize the green infrastructure, and there is a dividend. You know, when they talk about resilience, they define it as follows. They say, a policy that solves 2 or 3 things using one policy, but it also pays off an additional dividend that was not part of your reason for doing it. So here's our dividend. We get cleaner air by walking and biking, clean water with the infrastructure, and a much healthier lifestyle. And what the Sierra Club was after, the pollinator pathways. We need our bees and our mark butterflies back. So we get all of this by doing that infrastructure. Thank you very much.